I have a story that I've been waiting for months to tell, and this is finally the chance that it fits with a sermon. So, this was around Christmas time, and I was going through some of our accounts, some of our financial accounts, and I was just looking, and in one of our accounts there was money that was not supposed to be there, a lot of money. And so I looked, and there was $250,000 that just showed up in one of my accounts, like a lot of money. And so I was like, holy smokes! So not to be insensitive, but I was like, did somebody die? And so I called Christina, and I was like, did we inherit some money? Like, nobody even has this account. Like, what's happening right now? And we're just like, nobody knows. So, this was during Christmas time. Things are always busy during the church. So I'm just like, they'll probably figure it out, and just give it a couple days. It'll resolve itself or something like that. So I log back in a couple days later, and it's still there. And I'm like, and in the meantime, I'm like, man, what if this is actually, and. Okay, so I told them, and it was like the least enthusiastic response that I got from them. They were just like, yeah, it was a mistake, we'll deal with it, it'll be gone tomorrow. And it was like, you're welcome. But in the meantime, I had a couple of days where it was like, wow, if you put it in some boring index fund, and you're like, 8% return over 30 years, and it's going to be blah, 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 and you're just, my mind goes there of like, wow, that's a lot of money. And I've talked about this before, but sometimes for me, money is something that is attractive because it provides security. That's a part of where in my heart money is desirable, is that in the way I think, I think what things can go wrong, what storms could be coming. I want to be able to weather those storms, and so let's just save money, and so whatever comes our way, we'll be able to handle it. And there's an attraction to wealth in my own heart that I want to be able to weather the storm. And whenever I save enough for one storm, I think, well, what if something bigger comes and I want to save more? And there's a place where in my own heart that money has a hold of, this represents a way that I can take care of myself and I can meet my own needs. As you think of your relationship with money, it could be something similar. It could be something where it is money presents status. Or maybe money is a way that you feel like you've put in all the long hours, you've worked hard, other people were out having a good time, and you did all of the hard work, and so now finally you've acquired something, and so it's your time now. And you can show other people, or you can prove to yourself that it was all worth it, that the sacrifices you made, and so you've arrived and you have status and significance now. And maybe it's something that sometimes money can bring pleasure, and there's things that we don't want to see, feelings we don't want to have, discomfort that we don't want to have to look at, and so sometimes money can be a way that we can escape. There's different relationships that we can have with money, and it reveals things about our heart. Just as a quick side note, if you are our guest, we actually don't talk about money frequently, and so just know, this isn't going to end with, hey, there's a basket coming around your way, but Jesus speaks about money. And he speaks about money probably more often than we do really in our services. And it's something that we need to spend some time talking about and reflecting on, where we've been going through the Sermon on the Mount, talking about what does life in God's kingdom look like. For people who are followers of Jesus, for people who have placed their faith in him for salvation, what is life supposed to look like as we live under his rule? And part of this means examining our relationship to money. Money reveals a lot about what occupies our focus. So we're going to be in Matthew 16, and we're going to pick up starting in verse 19. And Jesus, as he's talking about this, he first starts in saying, assess your value and focus that you put on money, and if it occupies the right priority that it should have. He says, notice the fragility that wealth has. And so in verse 19, do not store up for yourselves treasure on earth, where moths and vermin destroy and thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Jesus here speaks of wealth being something that's fragile, something that can be lost. And he's saying, are you sure that this is where you want to put your focus? If your focus is on acquiring and developing wealth and pursuing money, why not rather put your time and focus in somewhere and acquiring treasures that can't be lost, in our heavenly treasures? He speaks here he talks about destructive forces. He talks about moths. And if you can imagine yourselves in that scenario, these are people where it's not going to the store where you can just buy things off the rack, clothing off the rack, but you can imagine everything had to be sewn by hand. And there was a scarcity and a tremendous effort that had to go into cloth, into clothing and blankets and anything else. And so there was a tremendous value that clothing would have, and so a moth would be a very destructive force. The second example, depending on your translation, it probably says something like vermin. It might say rust. The word here is a little bit vague, but it speaks to some sort of destructive force. Something that would corrode, something that would naturally just destroy or ruin something that's valuable. And there's the reality of there could be thieves. Somebody could you did nothing wrong, you worked hard, you saved, you were careful, and yet there was an injustice and something was taken from you. And the reality is that this can happen, and there can be people who are poor because of no fault of their own. And Jesus says, reassess, is this really the unreliability and the fragility of treasures here on earth, something that can be lost so easily? Is that really what you want to make the priority of your life? Do you put the appropriate focus on these things, or would it be better to prioritize something else? Something that can be lost so easily, and he says, reassess, is this really the focus it should take? When Jesus is speaking here, he's speaking to primarily working class people. You know, sometimes when we think of a verse like this, we think of the oil tycoon who's he has 5 Rolls Royce and you probably don't need a second super yacht or something like that. Here Jesus is talking to people who have the bare minimum. And there's a sense here where doesn't this almost seem a little bit insensitive that he's saying to these people? People who don't have that much. At this time, generally people would probably, what they would wear is kind of like this undergarment, like this inner tunic, or these inner clothes, and then they would have maybe 1 or 2 outer robes that they would wear. You know, that was all of their clothing. And Jesus is telling these people who have just a couple of changes of clothes, and he's saying, don't worry so much about earthly treasures. They have so little already. And he's saying, don't make earthly treasures your priority. And can you imagine what he would say to us where we have more than that? Where we have more comforts, where we have more privileges, and we have more things that are accessible to us. We have more, and he's saying, are you sure that are you putting your focus on the right things? Are you sure that your relationship with money reflects the reality that this is something that could be lost so easily? Where does your focus lie? Does your focus lie on this lifetime, knowing that this is something that's going to pass away, that this is something that you could lose of no fault of your own? Think about how much time and energy we can invest into earthly treasures. Think about how when we grow up, we want good education so that we can get a good job and so we can make enough money, and then we can save, and we get financial planners, and we figure out investing strategies, and we try to buy a home, or we try to do things to accumulate wealth. We can spend so much time in this. Do we put a similar or a greater emphasis on developing heavenly treasures? Do we put an appropriate balance and focus on these? Jesus doesn't necessarily tell us very much about what these heavenly treasures look like, but there's something to rewards that are going to be given to us, and there is a security that they cannot be lost. A security because it's something that he is giving to us. It's something that will be waiting for us. There will be privileges, there will be rewards, there will be status or honor that he gives to us. And he says, I'm not going to forget about what you've done. I'm not going to forget about the life that you lived and the acts of faith that you did. That's going to be secure, so make this your priority. The way that we live, the things that we value and occupy our focus, they're a reflection of our mindset. And do we have an eternal mindset, or do we have a temporal one? Consider this example. When you talk with somebody who just came back from vacation, you can tell some about what's important to them by the things that they did. For me, sometimes I want to escape from my anxiety of daily living, and so when I go on a trip, I don't want to have a schedule. I just want to go somewhere, and I'll look on Yelp the night before about what we're going to do the next day, and I'm okay if there's something we didn't get to. I want to go, and I just kind of want to explore and wander and do whatever sounds fun at the moment. I don't want to have a routine and a schedule. For me, that's something that's restful to me. There's some people where they're adventurous and they want to go and explore and see the key sites, and they want the thrill of a vacation, and so they want to try like adventurous foods, and they want to go explore a museum and see things like this, and that communicates something about what's important. There's some people who need an intervention, and so they go camping and like mosquito bites, and they have their issues, and so that reflects something about their heart too. But when you talk to somebody who just comes back from vacation, you can tell some about their heart and what's important to them, and even kind of what's restful, and even what are some of the challenges of their daily life by what they do when they have free time. There's something similar of what our focus on what are our priorities with where we want to pursue wealth and where we want to pursue our treasures. This exposes something about what we see as important. This reveals something about what we think really matters. We all have stories of people that we can look at and we can say, you have experienced tremendous generosity from people who have used their resources, including their money, for kingdom purposes. People who are extremely hospitable, people who will give of their time and of their skills to care for and love other people. And we have experiences and we know people like that. And that reflects some of where their mindset is, of I am thinking eternally when I live like this. But we also see examples of people, and you hear the stories of there's an inheritance and there's squabbling among the children over that inheritance. And that communicates some about what we see as important. And so part of what we have to be careful about is where is our mindset? Are we focused on this life now, or are we focused on eternal things? And Jesus is saying, do you realize how little of the treasures that we have here we can control? Just think about even the last couple of years of some of the things that we've gone through. Like, we've gone through a pandemic where so many people lost their jobs suddenly. The currency was toilet paper, right? And we've gone through things where it's like, you see on the news where there's forest fires, there's earthquakes, there's natural disasters that disrupt an economy and ruin people's livelihoods. People who go to the doctor and they get a diagnosis that they didn't expect. A couple years ago, there was the big cargo ship that got stuck in the Suez Canal and blocked up everything for however long it was. Things like that you have no control over and disrupts our economy and our personal finances, and how little control we actually have over that. And do we put the right focus on these things? And Jesus is saying, do you see how fragile the treasure is that we have here? Our relationship to money communicates the priority that we give to things here on earth, but also to things of eternal consequence. Earthly wealth can be lost easily. It also reveals something and limits our awareness of our own fragility. And continue in verse 22. This is a little bit of a confusing couple verses. He says, the eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eyes are unhealthy, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light within you is darkness, how great is that darkness? This seems like an unusual verse. This is still in the context of money. Both the verses before and after are related to money. And so this says something about how our eyes, or where we focus our attention, what it communicates and what it does to our own hearts. That isn't just that wealth is fragile, but where we put our focus and what we choose to put as the center of our hearts, and where the things that we channel our energy towards, this actually changes and affects what's going on in our heart. Here it's the lamp, the eyes, what we choose to illuminate our life with. Where we are looking and putting our focus, this actually impacts what's going on in our heart. It says here that with healthy eyes, with enough light, there is a revealing that can happen that sheds light. But with bad eyes, when we put our focus on the wrong things, that there is a darkness, there is a masking, there is a desensitizing that happens. And there's the reality that when our focus becomes too much on something that's temporal, it's not just that we're at risk of losing something that we put so much effort towards, but it actually causes a desensitization. I'm not saying that word. Desensitizing what's going on of our own awareness. That it deceives us. That it limits and impairs our ability to have of what we perceive. How we value money, it impacts our openness to what God is doing and how He is discipling us. It can numb us if we're not careful. You're probably familiar with the story, A Christmas Carol. In this is the grumpy old Scrooge who saves money, he hoards, and is remarkably ungenerous. Does not give to charity, does not treat his clerk very well, and he goes through this experience where he gets visited by the ghosts of Christmas. When Charles Dickens wrote this, part of what he is calling on the British people to is their complacency towards poverty, especially towards child poverty. And so when Scrooge is visited by the ghosts of Christmas, when one ghost visits him, the ghost reveals two emaciated children. And he calls their names Want and Ignorance. And there was the reality that because of Scrooge's obsession with hoarding and saving, the fact that he was ignoring so much of the needs around him, and his focus and his treasure was on earthly things, that it bred in him ignorance to other people's circumstances. That he couldn't see what other people needed. He couldn't see their own suffering, and he was content with that. He had become numbed to it. And there is a part where we have to recognize when money and wealth becomes an idol for us, when it becomes something that is our status, our security, it's not just that it's a fragile thing, but it's also something that is numbing our own sensations about what is true. That we don't see the reality of the circumstances, that not only is our wealth and security fragile, but we ourselves are fragile too. It can breed self-reliance. It creates barriers to God because how much do I actually need God? Because I now have the means to protect myself. I have the means to care for my own needs. I can take care of myself. And so how much do I actually need to pray for, to depend on God, when I can handle most of my issues? Consider the people who instead make their focus on things of kingdom values. And the promise of this passage is that this will encourage an attunement to him. The person who is willing to love others as himself, to love unselfishly, the person who is willing to love like Jesus loves us, does this not cultivate in them a heart where they are able to see their own needs and see the reality of the truths that God shows us in the gospel? That when we love others, we start to understand the depth that we are loved. That when we love others unselfishly, we start to realize that it's never been about what we contribute, it's never been about our abilities or what we have, that the gospel has always been about grace and his selfless love towards us. And when we live out like this, it helps us to realign our values as his disciples. You know, sometimes the people that come and move to Orange County, Southern California area, one of the things that you often will hear from them is, man, this is a fairly materialistic society and culture that we have here. There's an element of humility that we need to have, and even if we don't sense it in ourselves, there's the reality that we need to say, our society impacts us. Even if we don't think that we love money, even if we don't think that we find it as our security, there's a humility that we need to say, part of this society that we live in, it still impacts me and shapes me. And so even if I don't have the awareness, I need to examine and say, with humility, where we live does shape me some. And there's some where I am numbed to my dependence on finding wealth or money as security. Money impacts our sensitivity to God. in our sensitivity to his direction. The influence it holds over us runs deeper than we realize. In verse 24, Jesus asks, who really is in control? He says, no one can serve two masters. Either you will hate one and love the other, or you'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. Jesus makes this drastic distinction saying, look, you can't serve both. One is going to take priority over the other. You might have a translation that says instead of serve both God and money, it might say mammon. And this is just another word communicating that wealth or property. It's a source of confidence. And here Jesus is describing and saying, sometimes that we actually invert the order of our relationship to wealth. He's saying, consider who is actually the master. He's saying, it's not that we have money and we control money and money is ours and our possession and we choose where to use it. But Jesus is actually saying, money itself owns you. That it's not a job, it's not a profession, it's not something where you worked for and then money was something that you deserved and was then given to you as a paycheck and something that you merited. But he's saying when we have a temporal focus, when wealth is our priority and our focus, then it actually takes ownership over us and we become its slave. That it becomes our master. And Jesus is saying, you can have money as your master, something that is fragile. You can have the Lord as your master. And he's saying, who do you choose? But you won't be able to have both. That money will control us if we allow it to. Or we can ultimately allow the Lord to guide us and to control us. Jesus is saying, has money ever been sufficient to provide what it promised? Has it ever met your needs? Has it ever been satisfying? Has it ever delivered what it promised? Has it ever actually given you the status that you hoped for, the security that you hoped for? Or does it just breed self-reliance? Does it breed a sense of confidence that you can meet your own needs? Instead, he's saying our confidence needs to remain in the Lord, who gives us what we need, who provides for us, who lives according to an economy of grace rather than merit. Think of this. When in your life, when you've had seasons where you've had more, where you've had more saved, more means, has your wealth, has that enabled you to depend on others more or less? Has it enabled you to receive more grace or less grace? See, so many times what happens is we start to have wealth, we start to accumulate something, and then we go through something where we need a ride to the airport. And when you need help, you go and you ask for a friend, can you give me a ride? When you have something, then I got Uber now that I can do. I'm going to move. I don't need to ask my friends for help moving. I can hire movers. That wealth makes it easier for us to address our own needs, to provide for ourselves, and we have less needs for others and less openness to others. And as we go into this, we have embraced works righteousness. We have embraced that I can meet my own needs. I don't need other people. I can take care of myself. I can resolve my own problems and challenges. There is no one else I need because I can fix my own issues. And instead, we have to pause and say, God operates according to an economy of grace, not according to merit. And so whether I have little or whether I have plenty, I need to recognize what I have is by God's grace. And so I need to pause and recognize that what I have is by God, and He has a place in my life. And so my response then is, how do I live out what He has given to me? How much do you have was actually something that you had no control over. How much did you just benefit from a connection that somebody stepped in and helped you land a job that you didn't that maybe you didn't have an in on? How much did you benefit just from somebody interceding and praying for you or being with you? Someone who unexpectedly was there with you during a dark time. See, this is because we have needs, and the way that life looks in God's kingdom is by allowing God to meet our needs. It's in our needs and challenges that we remember that our confidence is ultimately in God and His grace, that He is in control, and we are dependent on Him showing up. That we need God to move, that we can never weather every storm, and we can never be prepared for every storm, that we need God to arrive. Psalm 33, this is a psalm that talks about the futility of placing our confidence in things of this world, and it ends with this. It says in verse 20, "We wait and hope for the Lord. He is our help and our shield. In Him our hearts rejoice, for we trust in His holy name. May your unfailing love be with us, Lord, even as we put our hope in you." The story of Scripture is God showing up and meeting people's needs, and this culminates in the cross. This culminates in Him seeing the needs that we have, seeing our brokenness, seeing our inability to meet our own needs, to provide for ourselves, to earn enough to provide security, to earn enough to have status, and He shows up and He provides for us justification before Him. That the cross is the ultimate sign that God sees you and provides for you and is worthy of your confidence. And we experience this, in Scripture, and we experience also His daily provision through His providence. But we must count on Him showing up. And so the question we ask is, how then do we respond? Money is not an enemy. It's not something we need to reject. It's not something that is wrong to have. But we also need to recognize the reality of it, that it's fragile, that it can be lost, and it can be lost by things that are completely out of our control. But as much as we want to depend on money, and we recognize that it's fragile, our hearts itself are fragile. And so we need someone who is faithful. We need someone who will not degrade, someone who will not be corrupted. We need someone who is not going to be destroyed by moths and rust that a thief will not take. And we need Him, and we need His provision. And so our focus then becomes, what is it that's before us? What are the resources that we have that we can use for eternal purposes? And this starts by recognizing and being dependent on God for His continual provision and grace.